We interrupt this program to bring you this bulletin. 4 persons, 3 identified as nationally famous rock and roll singers, died early today in a plane crash 5 miles north of Clear Lake, Iowa.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Gold. I'm your host, Daniela Taplin-Lundberg, and I'm here with my right-hand woman, Becca Camerata. Hey, Bex, how are you?
I'm good, Daniela. How are you?
I'm good. If you notice, I have a little bit of a scratchy voice, a little bit of a smelly cat. I don't know if you know that reference.
I do know that reference because now, sadly enough, Friends is on Nick at Night all night, every night. And so I listen to that reference when I fall asleep every night.
I got the Phoebe. But we're in for a very special episode today. Can you give us a little hint of what we're about to get into?
Yes, we are talking about the Taylor Hackford produced film La Bamba, and I'm very excited to hear about the history of this one and then to circle up with you after, because not only was this a very culturally important film, it was also a very important film to you personally.
Yes, my mother starred in the film as Richie Valens' mother, Connie Valenzuela, and so I lived the film real time when I was 12 years old. So I'm excited to hear the tale from Taylor's perspective and also give you my sort of 2 cents from my mother's perspective as one of the lead actresses.
I'm very excited for this one, so I will talk to you after.
Okay, let's get going. Taylor Hackford, iconic director and producer of some of my favorite movies, An Officer and a Gentleman, one of them that sort of stuck out for me, and Ray, actually, frankly. But you're as prolific a producer as you are a director, and I always admired that about you, probably knowing more about you than you did about me, but you really seem to follow your heart and drawn to music and underserved stories, it seemed to me. So today, Taylor, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive, and I'm going to force you to look back in your memory, and we're going to do a big focus on La Bamba, which is a film that sort of brought us together because my mother was one of the stars of the film, and it's where I first became aware of you as a prolific filmmaker. So give us a framework of how you got into this business, because I'm finding a lot of our audience loves to know how you find your way into this business if you don't know anything about it or you don't have family that necessarily was in it before you. So I'd love you just to sort of frame us a bit and what drew you to it and how you got into it.
Well, Daniela, I wasn't a legacy in the film business or show business in general. My mother raised me alone. She was a waitress in Santa Barbara. If you're going to grow up working class, Santa Barbara is a good place to be.
Good
because
views.
It's awfully nice.
Yeah.
But, I kind of came from the wrong side of the tracks. And a lot of Latinos were there because we all lived in the same neighborhood, which, as I said, the wrong side of the tracks.
I love that. And give us a framework. What time period is that really?
Mid-50s, I kind of was a child of rock and roll. And that's why I started early on my music training. My brother was much older than I was, and he had been drafted and gone to Korea. And he was a jazz nut. So when he left, I inherited at 5 or 6 years old, his jazz collection of Charlie Parker and Dexter Gordon. And so I listened to that. And then, of course, I was there in grammar school when Elvis broke. And Little Richard, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, all of those people were defining rock and roll. And that became my, lexicon. I loved it. And then I grew up and, finished school in Santa Barbara, and I was in student politics, and I played basketball on the team. I won a scholarship to USC. And at USC in Los Angeles, I went to the big city, as it were. And that was an interesting experience for me. And I majored in international relations and economics. And I had a path in mind to go to law school because I was into politics. And then it was the 60s, and the 60s were a very political decade. And I thought this would be a good course. USC is a great film school, but I did not go to the film school.
Okay.
In my senior year, when I was student body president of USC, I started to hang with some film students and go to screenings with them and talk to them. And they had a perspective about the importance and the power of filmmaking and changing people's hearts and minds. And that's what I was interested in doing, because I was like as I said, the 60s, I wouldn't call myself a red hot radical, but I certainly fit in the category of being pretty political and against the war in Vietnam, etc. So I started looking at film in a different way. And instead of going to Vietnam, I enlisted in the Peace Corps because it was an alternative service. In the process, my then wife and I went to Bolivia in South America. The job was to work at a vocational school for the construction skills outside La Paz. A lot of the volunteers went out to the Campo, and that's 12th, 13th century, really. And the campesinos were coming into La Paz, and they were, as I said, they were maybe 15th century with the kinds of places they were living, the villages they were living in, some of them not electrified. And when they came in, our job was to teach them construction skills. So it was a good project. But, when you're there, you really see a different life. And it's sometimes shocking. A lot of volunteers end up by not being able to cut it and going home. But we really took it seriously and enjoyed it. And I think it had a real impact on my desire to be a filmmaker instead of a lawyer.
Okay.
I took a Super 8 camera with me, and I started shooting Super 8 film in Bolivia. At first, it was just for demonstrations of the construction work we were doing. But then I started going out and shooting my own kind of movies. And it was fun and trying to put it together. I didn't have a Super 8 projector, so I could only put it together and imagine with a little viewer what it was going to be. But I had the bug. And so when I came back from the Peace Corps in 1969, I want to go to film school. Film school had already started at USC, and I hadn't even been accepted there. So I knew I had to do something because I had a wife, and we had to, exist. So when I was a student politician at USC, I appeared at KCET, which is the public television station.
Sure, of course.
And I went in and asked for a job. And the guy remembered me, and he said, well, I don't have a regular job to offer you. The only thing I have is the mailroom, where you'll do mimeographing and deliver mail, and that's it. I said, I'll take it. And he introduced me to the vice president of the station, who said, okay. And I started working there. And it was my start. It was my film school, as it were. And what a mailroom does is allow you to circulate through the building. And you meet everybody because you're delivering their mail. And it gives you a chance to see what the power structure is and who does what. And I did that. And at the same time, I was really studying film. My wife and I would go out to, 12 movies a week.
Oh, you're kidding.
If you go to a double feature on Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night, and then you catch a few others during the week, you can see that many films.
Oh, my God. And were there that many films to see, Taylor? Like, were you going
Oh, yeah. Well, I was educating myself. I mean, they would always be showing the great kind of classics, mostly of European cinema. Bergman and Godard, Fellini, Truffaut, and the French New Wave was happening then.
Love it.
And I was very definitely into that. But I saw all kinds of, Brunel, I saw all of Brunel's films. I did my studying of film like film students do when they're in school. And then I would also then fill in with John Ford and Howard Hawks and Raoul Walsh and all the great American directors. And so parallel to my work at KCET, I was filling in my film work. And I would also go out and shoot my Super 8.
I remember you won an Academy Award for a short film. What film was that?
It was called Teenage Father. I left KCET. After being there for 7 years, I left. And what am I going to do? Didn't have a job. I had a child. My first wife and I had broken up, and I had my child to take care of. But I found a social organization, the Children's Home Society of Southern California. And this was an adoption agency. And they wanted to do sex education films. So they gave me an assignment to make a half-hour film. And I said, I don't want to do a documentary. I want to do a dramatic film. And they said, well, as long as you can do it for the budget. And I said, I'll do it based on your files. And they said, okay. So I got all the caseworker files. I learned the process because they had interviewed the boys and the girls. And I wrote this script based on a teenage couple, and what happens to them. And I shot it And the film won an Academy Award as Best Dramatic Short.
So that sort of presumably launched your career. And, I think at some point I'd love to talk to you about Officer and a Gentleman and Against All Odds and all these great movies. You were so prolific. But for the purposes of this interview, I kind of want to talk about where the initial idea came for the Richie Valens story and how, it was a sort of anomaly at the time. I mean, just, Hispanic subject matter and musical films. And it just felt like that was sort of a dark horse thing to choose. So talk about that.
Well, after I won the Academy Award for the dramatic short, I got an agent at CAA. They were just a fledgling agency, just started.
Was it Fred Spector?
My first agent was Fred Spector, yes.
Oh my God.
And he's legendary.
Yeah, I mean, he is a legend.
And terrific. We're very, very close friends. But he got me in to see a couple of producers, Gene Kirkwood and Howard Koch Jr., who is now called Hawk Koch. They were producing a film called The Idolmaker, which was music related, about the making of teenage idols. And because of my music background, they took a shot with me. So I just want to say I made that film. It was a musical, and it was called The Idolmaker. And it, unfortunately, I made it for United Artists at the same time they were making Heaven's Gate. So although the film got great reviews and the audiences loved it, it never really got a good release.
Taylor, just explain to the audience what was the sort of travesty of Heaven's Gate.
Well, just Heaven's Gate was the most expensive film ever made. They pulled it from distribution before it was released, had to recut it. It got a really bad reputation. And United Artists, which is a venerable and great company, went bankrupt. They fell. But at that time, when I was I was making a feature film, I got a call from an old friend of mine, Danny Valdez. Now, Danny Valdez was part of a theater company, the great theater company called Teatro Campesino in San Juan Bautista. His brother, Luis, was the founder. Luis is a very heavy, very smart, incredibly talented dramatist. When Peter Brook's company came to the United States, they visited San Juan Bautista. That just tells you that the greatest avant-garde director in Europe came to visit Luis Valdez. And I'd known Danny because he had done a music show at KCET. He was an incredibly talented singer, songwriter, and actor. And he'd grown up in his older brother's company. Well, Danny had always wanted to play Richie Valens. And I grew up in California. As I told you earlier, most of my friends were Latino. And I knew Richie Valens. Of course, anybody did. La Bamba, and Come On, Let's Go, and Oh, Donna. He had big hits. And Danny and I had talked about, when neither one of us had a pot to piss in, I would try to make the film and he would be the star.
Yeah.
Well, 10 years had gone by since that had happened. And he said, hey, man, you're now got a deal in Hollywood. Let's make Richie. I said, Danny, great idea, but I'm just making my first film. I don't know whether I'll be able to make my second. So I made Idolmaker, got good reviews. I made An Officer and a Gentleman. It was a huge hit. And that gave me some power.
Yeah.
And then I made Against All Odds, which also did well. At that point, I called Richie back. I said, I want to go to the head of production here and see if he'll think about making La Bamba. And the head of Columbia at the time was Guy McElwain.
Okay.
And McElwain had a former agent, and he had actually brought me to Columbia from Paramount after I'd made a huge hit for Paramount with, they wanted me to do the films they wanted me to do.
Wow.
And I wanted to do something else.
Yeah.
And so McElwain said, I'll do Against All Odds with you at Columbia. And he gave me a deal there. So I went to him and I said, listen, there's an audience you're not serving. You're in the business to make money, aren't you?
Oh,
yeah.
Brilliant.
And you're trying to make successful films, yeah? Well, there's a huge audience that you're not serving. They go to your movies, but you're not hitting them. He said, yeah? What's that? I said, Latinos. Oh, yeah? Is that right?
Getting the chills. I love this.
I said, yes. And there was a Latino who had a #1 song in America in Spanish. At this point, everybody in the world knows it. It's a great story, and it needs to be told. And he goes, you going to direct it? I said, no, I'm going to produce it because it needs a Latino director.
So smart.
Because I really felt that. I felt, this is an underserved, underappreciated audience, and it needed to be represented.
Here's a bit of a rattlesnake. Hello, baby!
Well, Taylor, that must have taken a lot of muscle because it wasn't like Luis had a huge track record. So anyways, keep going.
They never heard of him. And also, to be fair, he was a dramatist. He worked in theater. He'd never done film. But I knew him. And Danny, remember, the beginning of this project was Danny Valdez and myself. Luis Valdez, he just kind of went, nah, not interested. And by the way, all things have to be given credit. Guy McElwain, the head of Columbia, said yes. That's a big deal. And he was very close to me. He trusted me. He also was no stupid guy. He realized that I was right. There was an audience that wasn't served. And also at that time, believe it or not, Coca-Cola owned Columbia. If there's anybody that understands marketing, it's Coca-Cola. And they understand who they sell Coca-Cola to. And there's a hell of a lot of Latinos that drink Coca-Cola. So I kind of sent a letter to them and they helped. So Danny and I then said, okay, we've got to find the family. We've got to get the rights. The mother, Connie Valenzuela, she lived some area around Samuel Batista. I went up there with Danny and Andrea Asimo, who was my head of development.
Okay.
And we visited Connie, and she was, by the way, she had a nickname, Concha.
Yes.
And Concha, by the way, Concha means something entirely different in South America.
Okay.
But a hard shell, like a concha shell, you can't break through it.
Yeah.
Concha was tough, Connie. So I went to her house and I walked in the living room and there was this shrine to Richie. The Virgin de Guadalupe is there. There's Richie. There's all this stuff. And I'm going, oh God, I want to tell a realistic story. And this is a saint she's maintained. She has a saint here that she has kept forever.
Right.
And we sat and talked, and Danny and I and Andrea talked. And I basically said, listen, Connie, I want to do a film about your son. I want to be respectful. And I want to tell the truth. I'm not going to make this a sugar-coated story. I mean, besides, everybody I've ever talked to about Richie Valens said he was the greatest kid that ever was, the sweetest. All. So I think it's going to be fine. But if you make a film about just sweetness, it ain't going to work.
Right.
So Connie goes, well, you should meet my oldest son, Bob. Bob Valenzuela comes up riding a Harley.
Oh, my God. For real?
And
he showed up in a Harley?
Oh, yeah.
Oh
yeah.
God.
He comes in and he's got the leather thing on from the bikers thing. He walks in and Bob was the older brother.
Yep.
Bob was the first and the chosen, except he was a bad boy.
Yeah.
He was the guy, it's true. You have immigrant groups that come to this country. They break in and they're breaking a racist barrier that is enormous.
Yeah.
And Bob was the guy who fought it. He ran weed. He got caught. He went to jail. He did all these things. And he was a very talented artist,
right?
But they were never going to give him a chance. So Bob walks in. He loved his brother. He was very cool. And immediately I saw the story.
Oh.
The bad brother and the good brother.
Yes.
Cain and Abel.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
East of Eden.
Yep.
East of Eden.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And I basically said to them in the first meeting, I think that the competition between brothers, because Richie's the youngest brother, he looks up to Bob. Bob is a guy fighting the system and having a very hard time of it. Connie's in the middle trying to keep the two on a path.
Yeah.
And then there's Connie Jr. and Irma, the sisters, who are little girls at the time. And I said, Connie, I'm not going to tell you. You have to trust me because I have to have final cut of this. You can't.
Yeah.
You either know me and trust me or you don't.
Okay.
But I guarantee you, my goal at the end of this is to make people love Richie. They may not love Bob as much, but I think we want to get into Bob. Bob's there.
Right.
He's sitting there.
Cojones.
But I also want to get behind Bob because I can tell by talking to him, I like him and I know he had a lot of pain and I want to see that. So she said, okay. Now, I also bought Richie's catalog. So I owned his catalog.
So Columbia bought it for you or how did that work?
No, I bought it personally.
Oh my God. I
knew what the catalog was earning, which is nothing, bupkis.
Yeah.
And I said, Connie, I want to buy this. I want to make the film. And I guarantee you that this will make double the money or more than you're making now.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, I'll pay you double.
So who did you buy the catalog from?
From her, because copyright was just running out.
Okay.
17 years had run out.
Oh, my God.
So I went back. We now had the rights. She signed and we had the rights. And now I went to Luis.
And was he always who you had sort of envisioned?
Yes. I mean, Danny said, you should direct this. I said, I can, but I think politically it's not a smart move, number one. And number two, I don't have the blood. La raza. And so we go to visit Luis. I go to San Juan. I say, Luis, I want you to write the screenplay. And he goes, listen, Richie Valens is a teenage kid. He does pop music. It's not what I'm into. And I said, Luis, your entire oeuvre, your entire career is about trying to translate the Latino experience into America.
Yeah.
When you look at the Pachuco, that Eddie almost played, I said, that's what it's about. The Pachuco riots is one thing. That's about Latinos trying to meld in and coming up against the system. You got the guy who kind of transcended into America. He had a number one song in Spanish, and he performed as a rock and roll idol. That's a story that deserves to be told. And you're the guy to do it. I convinced him. So we didn't hire Luis to direct at that point.
Okay.
Because that would have been I don't know if McElwain would have bought that.
Okay.
I said, you produce a terrific script. And if you do, then I'm going to carry you in on my shoulder and say, this is it. Well, Luis wrote a beautiful script, a really good script, because he knew.
Yeah, he understood.
And all that stuff with the Brujo down in Mexico, all the stuff in La Bamba that's really evocative and spiritual and interesting, Luis put in there. And he loved the idea of Bob and Richie, the good brother, the bad brother.
Yeah.
Because he could work with that. And making Connie, the really tough Concha, make her the tough mother who we could bang heads if she had to. And Luis knew, because up in Gilroy, around there, he'd grown up. The Valenzuela family had grown up. Their summer camp was to go pick apricots in San Benito County. And that was fun for the kids. They could, play with all the other kids. They picked the apricots. They could eat all the apricots they wanted. Well, Luis was from that area. He was from San Jose. He knew all that. So he knew the location. He put that in. Those imagery of the ground being filled with orange everywhere.
Oh, it's the best.
So he produced a great screenplay. And I handed it in, and they really loved it. And they said, we'd like to make this for cheap, but we want to make it. Always, I was saying, this is the film that shouldn't cost very much. First of all, there's no Latino actors that are well known, so you're not, that's not going to cost.
Right.
And then I said to Guy McElwain, who was my mentor, was my rabbi at Columbia, I said, Guy, I don't want to direct this. I told you I was going to produce it. I think Luis, who's written a great script, and look at it, it's visual, it's great. I think he will be the right director for this. And I'll back him up. But I'm not going to back him up like over his shoulder. I'm just going to produce. I'll be on the set.
Yeah.
And, and give my advice, but he'll be the director. And Guy said yes. So Luis came down and we cast the film. And this is a process that's always the most important thing in a film, the casting the actors.
Yeah. Tell me the whole thing. Yeah.
My casting director at the time, Nancy Klopper, recommended a young casting director named Junie Lowry.
Okay.
And she's now called Junie Lowry Johnson because she got married.
Okay.
But Junie was fantastic. Got along with Luis great. Okay. And we started to cast. So we bring in Isai Morales, who had done some really good work. And of course, Isai wants to play Richie. And Isai comes in and he reads. And he ain't no Richie. Uh-huh. But Luis goes, that's Bob.
Uh-huh.
That's Bob. And Isai goes, I ain't playing Bob. I'm not interested in Bob. I want to play Richie because he wants the star role.
He wants to be the star.
So we'll talk to you.
Uh-huh.
We saw a tape from an agent in Dallas, Texas, of Lou Diamond Phillips.
Okay.
And he looked really interesting. So we flew him out. He comes in and he's prepared the role of Bob. He says, I'm Bob. He plays Bob. And we look at each other, Luis and I, and go, that ain't Bob, but he could be an interesting Richie. So, I mean, he's going back the next day.
Okay.
At the end of the day. And Luis goes out and says, listen, Lou, it was a nice thing for Bob, but we think you could be a great Richie. He says, Richie, I'm not 16 years old. And he goes, yeah, but you got a sweetness about you. And a nice, I'd like you to go home tonight. And I'd like you to look at the role of Richie. And he says, one night I'm supposed to prepare this? He said, yes. Lou Diamond Phillips had never done anything.
Oh my God. He'd never acted before?
No,
Professionally?
well, he'd acted in the theater in Dallas in a theater company. But again, he never made any film. So Lou says, okay, I'll do it. He goes home. The next morning, he's going to fly that afternoon. The next morning, he comes in and he reads Richie, and we knew we had him. There it was.
Oh, that was it?
That was it.
I mean, you must have read like so many kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the interesting thing. There is a great actor named Jesse Borrego. And Jesse Borrego came in to read Bob and Richie, but he read Bob. He was great, just great. And we were really seriously interested. He was on a television show at the time called, what was the Alan Parker film that took place in the School of Performing Arts in New York?
Fame?
Fame, yeah. So Fame was a TV show. And we called up to see about Jesse's availability.
Yeah.
And the producers, I say, and this is a real lesson to producers. The producers of that show were not forward thinking. They didn't give a shit about actors.
Right.
And they said, oh, he's got one more episode and he's a dancer. He doesn't have any dialogue, but he's just a dancer. But we're not going to release him because we were starting before then. I said, this is a guy's career.
Right.
This is a great role.
Yeah.
And they said, sorry. And I had to tell Jesse, he says, yeah, well, that's it. But I mean, producers have to understand that they have people's lives and their careers in their hands.
Like, try and make that work if you can. That's someone's future you have.
Exactly. You go out of your way if you can. And they wouldn't do it. And at the same time, then we went back to Isai and said, Isai, we've cast the role of Richie. He's really good. We want you to read Bob with him. I think the guy is good, and we think you would be great. And Isai came in and read with Lou. And he realized there was something there. Because we said to Isai, you have to realize, he's the baby. He's the young one. You're the boss. You're the guy who, is the oldest, and you're a tough guy. You're a criminal, as it were. And Isai liked all that, and he signed on.
Those two together were so fabulous.
They were just great.
Cain and Abel I'd never thought of that comparison, but that's exactly right. That's what that was.
Then we had the other roles. And again, for Connie, Rosanna de Soto, your mother, was known as this beautiful, hot, tamale. She's really, and so they had,
I'm in a full body sweat as you say that.
Right. She had a reputation. Really, she'd done work. And of course, Luis knew her because she'd acted with teatro. And he went, yeah, Rosanna's terrific, but she's glamorous. And I don't think Connie should be glamorous. And so we brought in Rosanna. And the other thing about your mother, which is she's got she is a tough cookie. She's explosive, she's strong, and she had all the attributes of Connie, but the beautiful, glamorous quotient we didn't want. So Luis, because this is somebody he knows, he said, Rosanna, if you play this role, you can't come in with the rouge and the lipstick and the beautiful hairdo, no curl in your hair. You got to do this woman tough and like a working class mother. And Rosanna, to her credit, said, I'll do it.
The way she tells it, Taylor, is like, you guys couldn't find anyone else. It was like you had to circle back to her because it was that toughness. By
the way, that's true.
Yeah.
You see lots of actors, and what you always do, I believe, you give the role to the best actor.
Yeah.
She was it. And Luis convinced her to go down on her look. And she was fantastic with those boys, just fantastic.
So talk about Joey Pants, who's just like one of the greatest character actors of all time.
Joey Pants was in my first film. He was in The Idolmaker.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
And Joey Pants had been in a lot of films. And he always wore a toque.
Yeah.
Okay. So I bring him in, because it was me that brought him in.
Okay.
Luis loved him, but I didn't want that look.
Yeah.
And I said, Joey, Luis loves you. You got the role. but you got to do it without the toupee. He goes, oh, Taylor, everybody thinks I have hair. Don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. And I said, you got the role. You got to take off the tube. And he's a great actor, and he decided to do it.
Yeah.
And of course, he was great. And he subsequently played all these roles in so many films, and he's fantastic. Sometimes with the tube, sometimes without it.
Yeah.
But I was the first one to get the tube off.
Oh, that's
not in The Idolmaker, but in La Bamba. And he was great as Bob Keane. He was just fabulous.
Oh, he was so good.
And I wanted a really great hot couple, with Bob and Rosie. There should be sparks flying off them. Richie, he's got Donna, but it's a teenage romance.
Yeah, it's like sweet.
With Bob and Rosie, they get it on, and when they get it on, it's happening. So Elizabeth Pena came in, and I said to Elizabeth, you're terrific. She wanted the role. We read her with Bob. Sparks flew, and the rest is history. And of course, Danny Valdez, I put in as Lelo, the uncle.
Right, of course.
He could have played Richie when we first talked about it, but unfortunately now he was too old.
Time takes its toll, yeah.
Danny was the associate producer of the film. He was with me every step of the way. I got to give the credit to, it was the two of us that dreamed of this.
Right.
And then brought it home and then convinced his brother to write and direct because we both knew he was the guy.
Talk a little bit about prepping the music in those musical sequences, which to me was like the secret weapon of the film. And Brian Setzer, I remember, played
Eddie Cochran.
Yes, Eddie Cochran, yeah.
Eddie Cochran. Well, you have to understand, I'm a big person in music. And as soon as Los Lobos came on the scene, because they're an LA group, I was there. I went to see them in East Los Angeles, wherever they played, I saw them. And so this is actually when we first got the rights. I met them. I met the whole group. You don't meet Caesar. You don't meet David. You meet them all.
Okay. They travel as a squad.
Well, they're a band.
Yeah.
They all make the decision together.
Okay.
But I went out to see them and I told them about Richie. They had done Come On, Let's Go on a record. And they had not done La Bamba yet. And they kind of heard me and they said, it's a responsibility. Obviously, we love Richie's music. Richie was our inspiration as rock and rollers.
Right.
And they tentatively agreed. Then I got Luis on, and Luis went and talked to them, and they definitely agreed.
Okay.
And so the idea also for me was to not do lip sync, to re-record all of the material. Because the original material, it was not as great a quality as I would have liked. But also to make this a real original soundtrack. So we had Los Lobos. They recorded everything. Lou Diamond Phillips got in there and he learned lip sync perfectly. He was great. He's musical and he was great. But I also wanted to take his contemporaries at the time, which would be Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, Jackie Wilson, and also the Big Bopper, because the three of them died together in that fateful plane crash. But it was an important thing to be able to get people who could really play and sing and actually record the music in the right, proper way. So going to Brian Setzer to do Eddie Cochran was fantastic.
Brilliant.
Because he really could kick ass. He looked like him and he played it beautifully and it was wonderful. And then I went to Marshall Crenshaw, who had a new album out, and he was Buddy Holly. If you looked at the instrumentation, he wrote original songs, but in the style of Buddy Holly, it was great. And he agreed. Yeah. And then how do you get anyone to be Jackie Wilson, who's just, of the era, a killer, killer on stage? The music supervisor, Joel Sill. Joel had been head of music at Paramount when I was there. Okay. Worked with me on the soundtrack to An Officer and a Gentleman, and then moved to Warner Brothers. He worked really intimately with me on La Bamba from the very beginning. Wow. We got together and listened to music because we wanted a soundtrack that, in addition to the people who appeared on camera, that was totally real. Yeah. And worked. So at the opening sequence, Luis wrote this fantastic opening sequence, which we do in slow motion, and one of Luis's sons, a kid playing basketball. And this really happened. Richie was kept home that day sick. And this plane flew over out in Pacoima, and the plane crashed into the playground and killed his best friend.
Oh, it's unbelievable that happened.
That really happened. It's funny. There's a thing called the soul surviving son or the soul surviving brother. They believe that they are living for that person who died. And Richie always talked about his friend and also talked about this strange thing of him missing this event that saved his life. And so in that sequence, we use Santo and Johnny doing Sleepwalk, So that was the beginning of the piece, which was really interesting. But then, we cut to Bo Diddley for the title sequence.
Yeah, Bob
now,
on the
Los Lobos are playing behind Bo Diddley.
Oh.
He comes in, he records his own original song.
Oh, my God.
I mean, it was fantastic. It was a re-record of what he had recorded and had a hit with, but he was hot, really hot and really great. And Joel was able to, secure him. And then for the score of the movie, again, we wanted a signature score. We went to Carlos Santana. And again, Carlos Santana owed a debt to Richie Valens.
Right.
And he had never scored a movie. We put him together with a very nice and a really good composer named Miles Goodman.
Yeah.
And they collaborated on the score. So all the way through, you have this unique score with the signature Carlos Santana guitar playing. Again, I'll take credit for the music in this because that's what I do.
Yeah.
And with Joel Sill at my side.
Well, Taylor, I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize to produce a movie is one thing. It's, pushing a boulder uphill. But to produce a soundtrack like that is equally taxing and difficult to pull together all those pieces. And it really is one for the ages. And I've yet to do a movie really that is so heavily music focused. But was it so expensive to license the rights for all those songs, or how did you work it? Was it all?
Remember, I owned the catalog.
Well, you own the catalog of Richie, but for the other songs, for Buddy
the
Holly.
other songs, Joel Sill. We recorded just the composition. If you go for the masters, it's double. If you go just for the publishing, it's the half. And Joel Sill understood. We got a Favored Nations. We got a really good song at a certain price to start. And then we just said it's Favored Nations. And we were prepared to lose songs if we couldn't. And, you were talking about rights. That's crucial when you're doing a film like this. At the time, my lawyer, who subsequently became my partner, Stuart Benjamin, was really a huge help to us. Because when you're acquiring the life rights, when you're acquiring the publishing, when you're actually trying to deal with music companies and actually write contracts with them that allow you to get Favored Nations, Stuart was with us all the way. He had an executive producer credit, and he deserved it. He did a lot of hard work to make La Bamba what it was.
And just to back up, Favored Nations, just for the audience, just means, everyone's treated the same, right? Everyone gets the pay the same. And
right. Favored Nations is we're not going to pay anybody more than we paid for this copyright.
Well, let's go, little sweetheart.
Hey, Richie, relax, man. Everything's cool. Besides, the sky belongs to the stars, right?
I remember the film sort of shooting in the summer of maybe 87, 88, something like that.
Yeah.
I remember it being just a good shoot. Once you had all the pieces, it kind of went smoothly. I'm sure from your perspective, there were some hiccups.
No, it was a smooth shoot. The interesting thing was we had all these people that were very experienced. We developed a crew that really was terrific. And we had as many Latinos as we could on the crew because we were trying to make a statement. And it wasn't a difficult, when I say difficult, it wasn't we had this. Everybody has hiccups every day. But we were able to get by it because the crew was believing in the material as much as the cast and the producers and the director was. And Luis, as the Capitan, as the person who was out there, knew he was backed up.
One day I was allowed to come to set was the day you guys shot the Christmas performances. And that was just seared in my brain. But so you finished the shoot, you see an edit. Did it come together pretty smoothly? Like, did it sort of just work?
It flowed as per the script. But Shelley Kahn, who had done all of Ivan Reitman's films, and it was really good, cut the film. One of the things that, Shelley Kahn, who has a big ego.
Oh, uh-huh.
And Luis Valdez have a big ego. and that's good. And they put together a really nice first cut. But I showed it to the studio and they said it still needs a little something. So I went back myself and did, not huge, but I did a few things that I thought could be punched up. And Luis, as any director, was pissed. How dare you? And Shelley was pissed. How dare you? You know how many films I've cut? So I went in and I said, listen, I'm the producer. I'm trying to make the best film. I didn't violate your script. What they did, they changed the script. The last rewrite happens in the editing room. And they said, oh, we don't need that. We don't need that. Let's cut that out and smooth this stuff. So their first cut, that's what happened. I'm thinking back now to the studio. I showed it to them and they went, wait a minute, that's not the, what was the script?
Yeah.
So I went in and I recut the film to match the script because I loved the script and thought it was good.
And it was working.
So now Luis and Shelley confront me and they are really pissed. We didn't need that. I'm the writer. I said, pardon me, Luis, you're the writer. That's who I was honoring in this recut. You cut out things that I thought needed to be in the film. And they were really important to the telling of the story.
Right.
You got so close to it, you don't think the audience needs it. They need it.
Right.
So then I stepped back and said, okay, I did this because I wanted to show you both what I think was missing. But if you want to put everything back the way it was, you go ahead.
Yeah.
I think it will not be as good a film, but I'm not going to violate you, Luis, in that way. And that was, I think, an important thing because they went back and looked at the film. He made a couple of minor changes and we went with it. So that's the post-production process. And, that doesn't, pardon me, and I'm saying this to producers. People can be talented producers, but it's been my experience that most of them don't know shit about editing. They know when it works and they know when it doesn't work.
Yes.
I'm a filmmaker. And as a filmmaker, I can go in and touch something to hopefully make it better. I haven't done that all the time as I produce, but I've done it a few times. And if I think I can make the film better, why not? Because I'm a director and a producer. But in every instance, I say, you know what? If you don't look like those ideas, don't use them. You're the director. That's the way I deal with it. And Luis happily, understood that I was honoring the writer, who was him. and he made a little adjustments, which he has the right to do. And we went with the film. And when the studio saw it, they loved it. They got behind it. And that was it.
I find that the edit can be actually the trickiest times for personalities and relationships. And so when you can sort of navigate those waters and make some adjustments without destroying your relationship with your filmmaker, that's great producing.
It's the toughest. It's the toughest. And, by the way, Shelley is a great editor, but I think he got in with Luis and said, let's do this. Let's do this. We don't need this. We don't need this, which he was wrong about. But Luis liked it. So I had to fight them both. And in this instance, luckily, they came around.
So now we're through the edit. The studio loves it. Just talk about the release. And was it a rocket ship? Was it a slow burn? Like, tell me about that part of it.
This is where I was in the driver's seat. I had early on cultivated, as I told you, Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola understood the marketing potential. So I said, I'd like to release this film simultaneous, day and date, in both English and Spanish. And it never happened in the United States. And we went out, 15 to 20% of the theaters we went into on our release were Spanish-speaking theaters.
Oh, that's great.
Coca-Cola did special marketing in supermarkets for La Bamba, and they marketed in Spanish. So, Latinos are coming through, getting their normal Coca-Cola and going, oh, wow, look at that. That's us, right? In Spanish.
Yes.
And then we announced it. Well, our grosses, we didn't go through the roof, but they were really good.
Yeah.
And I think 15 to 18% of those grosses were from Spanish-speaking theaters.
Oh.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
And Columbia got behind. We had great trailers. I did a trailer that was, I thought, somewhat unprecedented. You know, there were a number of people who were famous that could talk about Richie Valens, having seen him. So one was Little Richard, and Little Richard is unbelievable. He's a firecracker ready to ignite every second. Then Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan had seen Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper the night before they died. Your mother knew Bob Dylan really well from living next to him in Malibu.
Yes.
And so she said, well, I can get Bob. I said, you can, really? Yeah, I'll get Bob. He'll come.
Yeah.
I said, Rosanna, don't bullshit me. You can't? Yeah, I got him. And then we put Bryan Adams, who at that time was a big hit singer-songwriter, who wouldn't have seen Richie Valens, but could talk about him as a singer-songwriter. And so I put together this trailer, and I got Little Richard. He was fantastic. I shot him. He said, yeah, I knew Little Richie. He was hot, man. He got up there. He played the guitar. He did, and it was Little Richard. He was fantastic. And then we went, I said, so, okay, Rosanna, you got to deliver Dylan. Yeah, well, he wants to shoot it in Malibu. I said, okay, we can come out there. No, he wants to shoot it in a big Cadillac going up PCH. I said, Rosanna, how are we going to be able to do that? And Sandy Bull, you know, the guitarist?
Yeah, sure.
Who was a friend of hers. He's got this big old Cadillac convertible. And he's going to drive, and Bob Dylan's going to be in the seat here, and then you can film him. So I think, Rosanna, you're making this as hard as you possibly can. Hey, you want Bob Dylan? Yeah, you want Bob Dylan?
Yeah, always. Still today.
So I go out, and it was fantastic because Bob's sitting forward. We're in the back seat with the camera, but we get him in profile, and he just does this thing. Yeah, I saw Richie the night before he died in Duluth. He was cool, man. He could play, and he could take the stage, and it was a huge loss. I mean, it was Bob Dylan talking, and Bob Dylan had not done a lot of interviews up to
I
that
know,
point.
I know.
So I put together this trailer, which went out. It was the teaser about a month before the release, and put it in theaters like a regular teaser. And it was not like scenes from the film at all. It was like, whoa, this is coming, and these are important people. And it was innovative, and it really did. It prepared people.
So innovative. It's so cool. Then
we cut a great trailer, and the trailer went out, and it was hot and fun, and it started generating a lot of interest. And then what we did is Joel Sill, who is, again, the music supervisor, knew people at MTV.
Yeah.
And they said, listen, every now and then you do a kind of a special preview of something. And La Bamba is about rock and roll. It's about a Latino, and you should do this. And they agreed. So we went to the Palace, and MTV did an hour-and-a-half special of Richie, and Los Lobos performed, and Isai and Lou Diamond Phillips got up on stage, and people were all dressed up. And
right.
And they broadcast this live and said, this is La Bamba coming. So it created a groundswell of interest. I forget how much we opened on first weekend, but it was respectable. It was more than Columbia ever thought they were going to get. And then it started to build. It started to build attention. And that film grossed $55 million in the United States, which for a film that cost $3 million, and it was a Latino film.
Incredible.
With no stars, it's still the highest grossing Latino film, which is both a compliment to us, but a tragic fact. You know, Selena should have killed us because there was a great contemporary artist, but pardon me for saying it. And Eddie was great, and Jennifer was fantastic, but they soft pedaled the real story, and the audience knows that they can smell it, and they also know the real story of Selena. So the fact is, I thought they were going to kill us. They didn't do it, and since then, there's been no Latino film out of Hollywood that has grossed more than $55 million. By the way, the film La Bamba did really well for it. La Bamba played for a year in Paris.
Oh my God.
A year. And I mean, the French loved La Bamba.
That's incredible.
Anyway, it was a fantastic experience. And by the way, it rejuvenated the catalog. And Connie got paid about I think 7 to 10 times what it was generating before. She was very pleased. And it was great.
It really is such a success story. And it's funny, as a producer now, I keep trying to figure out ways to sort of recapture the spirit of that movie. But I think your choices now feel more obvious, but at the time, like making sure you had a Hispanic filmmaker and just trying to be authentic to the story and the culture was so innovative and progressive. And it's something I really bear in mind now. So Taylor, this has been so fun, such an incredible tale. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for going on record about this great film. It's just like one of my all-time favorites, and you're the best.
I really appreciate it, Danielle. I'll see you soon.
No.
And now,
No.
selection in honor of the dead.
Not Richie. Not my Richie. Bob, not my Richie. Not Richie. Not Richie, Bob.
So Bex, how about that episode?
It was great. It was really interesting to me on a couple different levels. One, hearing Taylor talk about the cultural importance of this movie, how there really was a lack of content for a Latino audience at the time. And he knew that, he saw that, and he figured out how to build a team to tell the story of a musician that everyone knows, even if they don't know that they know him. So that was really cool. But it was also cool for me to realize that you were a part of it when you were so young. And we had done the episode with your father about Mean Streets. Mm-hmm. And that was clearly very impactful for you and was a big influence on why you became a producer. So it was interesting to me to realize that on your mom's side as well, this was probably a huge influence to you being on set when you were 12 years old and really getting to see this magic happen. And it does sound like your mom was quite a force. So that was really cool for me to hear how much this film was a part of your childhood and your growing up.
Well, the thing I loved is Taylor's story about my mom convincing Bob Dylan to do an interview for the film and sort of be used as a teaser for the film itself. And only my mother could have pulled that off. I mean, I think she was like such a sort of strong character, and she was so charming. And, we learned a little bit about that in my dad's episode about Mean Streets, but she really was someone who just charmed the pants off of anyone she met. And I think Bob Dylan was just another person that she wasn't afraid of and wasn't afraid to ask the question and sort of got things done because of it.
That trailer was one of the most interesting parts of this episode to me because Taylor Hackford clearly did a lot of really innovative things when he was producing this, but one of the most innovative, it felt like to me, was that trailer that wasn't a trailer. Because even to this day, even though people aren't going to theaters as often, trailers are really hugely important. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we did Harriet and the Harriet trailer came out and we were just refreshing the YouTube to see how many counts, how many views we had, because it was such a big deal. And for Taylor to know that and to also know that he had an opportunity here to use the power of celebrity plus the power of a trailer.
Yes.
It was so smart. So, and the fact that he called on your mom to get Bob Dylan and just, it was very, very resourceful and clearly paid off.
I also loved hearing about the sort of music side of the film. We really haven't done that yet. And understanding that when you're making a film with music that exists, it's almost twice as hard to produce the film because you have to license all the music and then most likely re-record all the music and tie it to actual performances on camera. And so it's a whole other gig, which he did really, really well.
And I do think that music and music licensing is something that a lot of people don't understand how complicated it is. Mm-hmm. And Taylor talked about, whether you get just the publishing rights or the sync and the master and what those mean and who controls those rights and why it's so expensive. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in music licensing for film?
Well, I think the really brilliant thing Taylor did was I'm pretty sure he bought out the Richie Valens catalog outright from the beginning. And I think he probably did a profit share with Connie Valenzuela so that she was able to participate if the film was successful. But that was probably the smartest thing that Taylor did, speaking of making money in this business. But then what it seemed he did, he probably bought out the publishing right, which means the rights to the music, but not the masters. And the masters are the side of music where the artist is actually recording that actual version of the song. If you notice, Taylor Swift, as an example, has re-recorded all her old songs, new masters of them. And those are the masters that she controls. And so in that example, it's like, it makes sense for Taylor Swift to re-record her old masters because she's going to benefit financially from the new masters. So what Taylor did is, I'm pretty sure he controlled the publishing rights of those songs and then had new artists record the versions of the songs. And so those two sides of profits are like very, very different. And so I thought that was really, really fascinating. And then managing to get all the other music, the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly. And what he did there was create a favored nations deal. So whatever they paid one artist, they paid the other artist the exact same. And so it sort of level sets what everyone's expectations are. And then probably everyone benefits from the success of the film. So it was really, really complex and really, really smart deal making. And I think he had a lot of help from his music supervisor, but it just all felt like really, really brilliantly executed for a very small film. So that was so fun. There's a couple other things that Taylor said that really stuck with me. The one last thing I just wanted to mention was that there was an actor that was not allowed out of his contract from a television show called Fame at the time because the producers were unwilling to sort of bend the schedule from him. And what Taylor said really stuck with me. I take gems from all of these great producers. It was like, whenever you're asked by another production to help your actor get out of a schedule or get out of a shoot early, you should try to do it as a producer because you're dealing with someone's livelihood and someone's future and someone's career. And so it behooves you to really try your best to help other people like rise up, And so I was like, that's been my instinct a little bit, but it was really, really nice to hear that because it's another little gem we're going to put on our wall of great producing.
Yeah, I think it's so easy when you're making a movie you have to focus so much on the business side of it and how do we get this off the ground. And sometimes if an actor is perfect for a role, but their schedule doesn't work or you can't get the fee right or whatever it is, you have to move on. Yeah. And I think sometimes people do that way too easily. Yes. And forget that this is such a big deal. This really is these people's lives. Yeah. And so that was really important to remember that you're not just moving, chess pieces. These are people.
From my mother's perspective, and I mentioned it during the interview, she was cast as Connie Valenzuela because they literally could not find anyone else. And I remember those weeks where she was just, no information was coming to her. They were probably like circling the globe to try to find someone who had like the strength to carry out that character. And it finally came back to her. But, so often we're casting movies and we're talking about various actors as if they're interchangeable pieces. And the truth is, it's like these actors put their heart and soul on the line in these auditions, and then they never hear any information back. And so it's very difficult when you're like trying to lift a film off the ground, but like to be sensitive to like how much they're putting out there and then not hearing literally a word back is very, very difficult. And it's a really, really tough gig. All right, guys, we'll keep listening. You can find us at Stay Gold Features on Instagram. DM us. Please subscribe. We're having so much fun. We're growing our audience. And write reviews whenever you can. We love you. See you next week.